Hi everybody. Today we're taking a closer look at a very old and obscure game simply called Blockade. And there are many different games with this title, but the one I'm talking about is from Corey Game Company, produced in 1941. Before we go any further, let's answer the obvious question. Why or how did I ever arrive here of all places? Well, it was from a war game discussion thread on BGG, and I'm interested in war games, hex and counter, all that stuff, even though I haven't delved into that genre on this channel yet. I hope to do that occasionally and soon. And so I read the discussion threads, and one day there was one that talked about CRTs, combat results tables, notable ones, and those which people remembered the most for various odd reasons. And eventually the discussion turned into the question, what is the earliest example of a CRT used in a tabletop setup? And the consensus seemed to be this title, so automatically I was interested. Games that use combat results tables involve odds maximization through maneuver, positioning, and strategy, and they incorporate luck, which I like. Nowadays, CRTs are typically associated with cardboard counters and hex maps, but that wasn't the case in 1941. That type of system hadn't been invented yet. This game uses actual minis on a grid. So curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to see how it all worked. In the end, I believe I rediscovered an oldie that anybody can enjoy today. And with this video, I argue that if you apply 5 key mods to Blockade 1941, ultimately you'll be left with a highly playable, entertaining, and enjoyable 2-player entry-level war game. Today, Blockade 41 is rare enough, old enough that it falls into the print-and-play project category for me. Can you still find copies online, on eBay, on other auction sites? Yeah, occasionally. Typically, they aren't in very good condition or complete. So I recommend doing what I did if you really want to add this game to your collection. Improvise. I actually enjoy doing this type of thing. I know I'm weird, but it's worth it to me. So here's what you can do. Firstly, don't necessarily rely on BGG in this case. I found the best resource for this game was the internet at large. Over the years, various people have taken quality pics of the game components. They have to if they are sellers of a game this old. Nobody would buy on the secondary market unless they knew the exact condition of the set. So map scans, you could find them. Download, clean it up on a paint program, drop it into Excel, print in sections, laminate, and kaboom. As far as I'm concerned, that's the hardest part. If you get to this point, you know you're in business. I think it looks good. It kind of reminds me of the old Frank Capra movie series, Why We Fight. You know that iconic part where it explains the Second World War as a conflict between a free world against a slave world? And it shows the graphic of a normal-looking Earth versus a black Earth. And I imagine here this map represents what if a good Great Britain versus an evil Great Britain right next to each other, each trying to starve the other out of existence. That's the premise of Blockade. It's interesting, so sign me up. The required minis are 2 times 3 warships, 3 cargo ships, 2 planes, and 2 submarines, and that's it. I looked into getting the original tin or lead minis, whatever they were made out of, probably lead, that came with the original. Unfortunately, I've never seen a complete set for sale ever. But I didn't care because I just hit up the Hobby Bunker, I believe it was, for 2 sets of ANA World War I plastic minis. They're better anyway. They're bigger, and the original cargo ships were just junky wood blocks. So this mod is a definite upgrade. And next you need 2 sets of 20 markers for each side. The markers are resource credits in metal, oil, ammo, and food. Each country begins with 5 credits in each category. The originals were plain white cardboard, I think, so I modded up old video arcade tokens I collected over the years into game components. Metal coins are always nice. I don't game in arcades anymore anyway. But a quick side story, I had a part-time job in a movie theater ages ago, and the arcade section had a carpet with a Planetscape pattern on it. And if you dropped a token on the floor, it blended in perfectly with the carpet design. That, with the dark lighting, you couldn't see them. And at the end of the night, cleaning up, these things covered the floor all the time. So I just collected them. And all these years later, it's kind of neat I can repurpose them here. Anyway, these component upgrades I will call mod number 1. I'm talking about the credits and the updated pieces. So once we're set up with the map and units, we can take a quick look at how the game actually plays. The object is to run your opponent out of one category of resources. You win when this happens. At the start of each turn, players spin an action spinner that determines how many and what resources your country burns in a turn, and how many movement points you get. To burn a resource token, you remove it from your country's inventory, and in my game, you place it behind your enemy on the edge of the map at an appropriate port location. They can be retrieved from anywhere by either player. As the game wears on, more and more of these things build up in ports on the edges of the map, and if you ever run out of one type of credit and you can't replace it by the end of your turn, you lose the game. You move your cargo ships to the ports to get resources for your home territory. Movement points can be divided among your various units. Movement in the original game can be diagonal, but I find you get a much cleaner game with respect to adjacencies if you limit your movement to right angles, so it's orthogonal movement. Even though it looks weirder, it's up to you though. Each cargo ship can carry a single token. Airplane unit can fly over land as well as water. Ports are safe spots. Units can't be attacked in ports in this game. So the cool thing about all this is you can see what your opponent is running out of and react to it by blockading ports and triggering expensive and destructive battles. And it's really fun setting up blockades or running from raiders. If you sink a load of transport in my game, the token it carries is permanently removed from the game. That's a rule I added. So watching the action unfold is pretty neat. Although there is an obvious and significant problem with the original gameplay system, in my opinion, and that is the spinner itself. Nothing against them. In some games, they have a place, like, I don't know, Flying Buffalo's Nuclear War, for example. The Fallout spinner is a fun component. But here, it's just tedious. And by getting rid of it and replacing it with a custom action chart, you get a much more modern, smoother, faster running game. Turn action chart I came up with looks like this. It requires a 1d10 roll. And as you can see, it allows for choice where there was none in the original. No matter what the die result, a player may always either blow all their movement points on military or transport movement, or a combination of both, but that is where variability comes into play. For example, say you roll a 2, you burn 1 ammo, and then say you're in a situation where you really need to move both military and transport units. However, a transport is 5 moves away from a safe harbor. And with the mixed movement option, you're only allowed 2 transport moves and 9 military moves. So what would you do? Sacrifice offensive movement points and choose all transport moves, or leave the transport hanging but move military units into position that might potentially do greater damage to your opponent. So once again, in my version, the randomness is restricted to situations where you choose to move both types of units on the same turn. Also, you can see result number 5 is different from the others. You get double movement, but also exhaust 2 resources instead of 1. So you have to make those turns really count. So I would say that is essential mod number 2, getting rid of the turn action spinner. Now for combat resolution. Whenever 2 units end their movement adjacent to each other on the map, 1d8 roll on the combat resolution table is required. It covers everything. Every single possible combination of unit encounters is on there, in addition to something pretty cool. Whenever a transport is next to a friendly military unit, it is no longer considered a transport for combat resolution purposes. It is instead considered a convoy. One of 3 types: convoy with a sub, convoy with a plane, or one with a battleship. And each has a separate column on the CRT that has different results depending on what's attacking it. Obviously, being in a convoy greatly increases a transport's survivability in combat. Typical results appear: retreats, exchanges, attacker or defender eliminated, all the good stuff. The problem is nothing, actually. I didn't change it at all. The results seem reasonable to me. I simply looked at photos of the original and reformatted the chart so I could fit it on one page and add color, so at a glance you could distinguish sunk results in red from retreat results in black. And I thought that part of the game design was and is particularly impressive. I think it holds up, I really do. Mod number 3 that you could try is adding unit replacements to the game. I don't think the original rules made any accommodation for this, but it's easy enough to implement, and I add a unit replacement chart. It looks like this. At the beginning of a player's turn, players may buy back lost units for a cost. This is a difficult decision because resources quickly become scarce in this game and always seem to be running out. Mod number 4 is another thing you could try. I got this idea from a BGG user named Louis the Toad, and he said the game could use spotting rules, and I agree. So I added a spotting chart, roll prior to combat. Players roll 1d10 on a spotting chart that is simply a modded combat resolution table. You can see I fashioned mine in such a way that players would have to feel quite lucky to avoid detection. And you can see when a plane is involved, it is particularly difficult to evade detection. It really adds something to the game too. If one of your loaded transports gets caught out in the open, but then the player fails to detect it, that's always funny. And you'll say like, whew, that was close. Lastly, but most importantly, is mod number 5. This mod eliminates the time dials in the original game and replaces them with a turn track and a point scoring system. In the original game, if a player runs out of a resource, they have like 12 turns to replace an exhausted resource or whatever, and that is tracked on a clock thing display, and it makes the game too long. Especially so if you are modding other stuff like me. So try adding a turn track instead, just 12 game rounds. After that, total points to determine a winner if nobody runs out of a resource. So you score 1 point per resource token in your home territory, 2 points per transport, sub, and plane, 3 points per battleship, and if the score is tied after 12 turns, play 3 turns of overtime. And that's the game. So I can't emphasize this enough. The Blockade 1941 game benefits immensely from the addition of a turn track and a simple scoring system. It encourages aggressive play, especially as the time winds down, and you shouldn't have too much trouble getting people to play this game with you if they know in advance it's just 12 turns. I took this game to a couple of meetups, a university game night, and I had no problem finding people to play it with me. Everybody said the same thing. Cool, where did you get this? You get the hardcore gamers too, pouring over the CRT, trying to find an edge. You love to see it. And subs are pretty garbage, by the way, unless you can snipe unprotected transports, in which case they are especially deadly. That's what we discovered. Anyway, overall, for its age, it's underrated. It's fast and fun, or rather it can be with mods. Although completely rare nowadays, it's something you can get and enjoy or build up as an activity, like I did. And then just play it with your gaming buddies for a really good time. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.